misinformation, hate speech, etc. These have always existed. What has not always existed, what is new, is that they are being distributed. Ultimately, every person should have a single voice. No person should be able to appear like a crowd. If a politician makes a post and you see 100 comments on those posts, you should be able to know who those comments are from. When I tried to come forward with several dozen Indian news outlets with my documentation back in June, I needed to assist half a dozen reporters and outlets on how to open the zip file. I made the decision that I was going to be open about being trans because if it gave me difficulty in employment, I would not want to work at that place anyways. But that was a decision I could afford to make.
Welcome to this interview on the News Minute. I'm with Sophie Zhang. She is the whistleblower who released a lot of documents from Facebook. Specifically, some of these documents relate to India and how Facebook's sort of actions have led to violence, communal violence in India and several other places across the world. Sophie, welcome to the News Minute. And my first question to you really is, what's life been like since the expose? What is your employment status, if you'd like to share that with us? And what's been happening since then?
Hi, pleasure to be with you at the News Minute. And so, anyways, right now, life for me is pretty simple. I stay at home and pet my cats and talk to reporters. The cats are the most important part. I just flew home a few days ago from India. I was in Delhi for the Media Rambo, the news conference, and so I am a bit jet lagged. Right now, I am sleeping on both India's night and American night, which means that, like a cat, I'm only awake during morning and evening. But I am not currently employed. I have not looked for employment since becoming a whistleblower. I mean, I don't think it would be fair for me to get a job while I am still publicly speaking out. That seems like it would be rather rude to any company that was nice enough to hire me, but I would like to look for a job at some point, if only so I have an excuse to stop talking to the press. Apologies.
Absolutely, I can understand how tiring that must be for you. So, Sophie, in India specifically, nothing much seems to have come out of the papers that you've exposed in terms of a government response, right? The WhatsApp and Facebook are regularly still used by right-wing extremist forces. We've done a lot of stories on how they organize on right-wing on these platforms for violent incidents. So Meta and Facebook have been accused of sort of pandering to the Indian government when it comes to, because it is a right-wing government that is in power in India, and they've been accused of like sort of pandering to the government and not doing much in terms of taking down content that can incite violence in the country. So if big tech were to act, then what should these companies, what should big companies like Meta be doing to ensure that the spread of hatred and inciting of communal violence does not happen on their platforms? And if these companies are not going to act, what should citizens be doing? What should regular people, be doing?
So I just want to, before I actually answer the question, I just want to clarify first. I mean, hate speech, spreading of extremist views, and inciting violence are important and serious topics that are concerning in India. They are also not the topics that I personally worked on or released documentation on. The area that I worked on was inauthentic activity and the use of fake accounts to spread narratives, such as happens in IT cells. And this may sound similar to misinformation and hate speech, etc., but they're separate issues. Suppose that someone says Islam and Hinduism are the same religion. This is obvious misinformation. It does not matter who says it, whether it is a politician, a child, a religious leader, or, or anyone else. It is misinformation, and I hope people can recognize that. Suppose instead I set up 10,000 fake accounts and on Facebook and use it to and have all of them say Hindus and Muslims are both perfectly nice people who should live together peacefully. There is nothing wrong with this message. What is wrong is that I'm using fake accounts to spread them and drowning out the voices of the real people. In the same way that there is nothing wrong with voting for the Congress or the app or the BJP or Trinamool or anyone else. What would be wrong would be stuffing ballot boxes with thousands of fake votes for them, regardless of who the fake votes are for. And so with that, and so my work was against essentially IT cells' fake accounts. It was agnostic as to what they were doing. With that said, you're asking about the use of Facebook, WhatsApp, and other platforms owned by Meta to incite violence. Presumably, you may be thinking of recent, for instance, the WhatsApp lynchings that occurred in India tragically. And you may also be thinking, for instance, of the communal violence that has happened in India, in Sri Lanka, in Myanmar as an apparent result of Facebook. And so I want to be clear, this is my personal viewpoint as to what can be done, what should be done, ideally. From my personal viewpoint, misinformation, hate speech, etc., these have always existed. What has not always existed, what is new, is that they are being distributed. 50 years ago, if you wanted a message to be spread, you had to go through Times of India, Hindustan Times, etc. When Indira Gandhi declared the emergency, one of the first things she did was crack down on the press. Today, it would be banning social media or etc. Because today it does not really matter what is reported in Hindustan Times, Times of India, etc. So much as what people like, comment, and share on in social media. If it doesn't go viral, it might as well not exist. And so 50 years ago, if people wanted to spread rumors, misinformation about communal violence, about and etc., they would not go for much further than the person next door. But today, they are spread easily through social media. This is not a problem that they are being posted. It is a problem that they are being distributed. We talk about rights to freedom of speech, but no one has a right to freedom of distribution. We do not expect that the Hindustan Times will cover the story of every person in India. Frankly, there is not the room in the Hindustan Times for that. And so I think a lot of the current discussion on the area is around content moderation, about whether this content should be removed or not. But to myself, that is the wrong question. The question is of content distribution, and so if I wanted to stop the use of WhatsApp, Facebook, etc. for communal violence, I would not conduct anything I would not do anything regarding the removal of this content. Rather, I would force social media, WhatsApp, Facebook, etc., to remove a share button, to remove the ability of WhatsApp messages to be forwarded. Of course, you can still copy paste these messages, but simply removing a share or forward button would increase the friction and make it harder for messages to be so easily distributed.
Right. So I have a follow-up question, Sophie, on that. In terms of, so we have seen that this kind of quick distribution of messages has helped as well in a lot of cases, right? I mean, on the one side, we do see that this distribution is a problem. I get what you're saying, but when we see, like, natural disasters like floods, or sort of any kind of a campaign like the one that's happening in Iran, the spread of that is also sort of connected to the ease with which it can be shared. Do you think the harm sort of outweighs the benefit of this ease of distribution?
I, I think that it's a complicated questions for the sociologists and others. It is certainly, I mean, if you asked me 20 years ago, I would have been very optimistic about social media uprooting barriers to distribution. I, I was like many people. I was enthusiastic to have to, for society to no longer be subject to gatekeepers in the traditional media who decided what would be reported on, what could go viral, what could, well, we didn't say viral back then, what would be spoken about, and in many cases, social media has helped those efforts. For instance, with protests against dictatorships in Iran, as you pointed out, or even or next door to India in Myanmar, like when the military dictatorships took over in Myanmar 20 or more years ago, with the first coup d'etat, there were no mass protests in the way that are possible today because the opposition could not get their messages out, could not see that they could not organize among their supporters, and so the situation is very different now, and it is certainly a complicated question. I think I'm speaking about Myanmar because I think it best exemplifies the issues. Because social media has been used for great ill in Myanmar, with the ongoing genocide against the Rohingya Muslims and other ethnic minorities in Myanmar. But at the same time, it has also allowed for opposition groups to fight back in a way that was not previously possible. And frankly, to answer the questions of is this a net benefit or net negative, I would ask some of the people most affected. I would ask someone from Myanmar or someone else. I certainly do not feel comfortable myself speaking on it's the price of these people, a fair exchange for the voices of those.
Absolutely. Sophie, a very perhaps basic question, right? How do you differentiate between what is an inauthentic account and what is perhaps an anonymous account? Because a lot of people online are anonymous for reasons of safety. Marginalized people, a lot of marginalized people are online behind anonymous accounts, and they do find the kind of reach that they can, that they possibly cannot in real life, like offline, right? Because it becomes easier on the internet. But what is the difference? What is the key difference between who is anonymous and who is inauthentic?
The key difference is that if you're not, it's that a real person only has one account, the
Mm,
one voice. If you're being anonymous, you can for instance set up one account for your personal life and one account for your professional life. That is something that people do. But in those cases, those accounts do not usually interact with one another. They speak about separate voices. The total amount of the total amount of speech essentially remains roughly the same. The principle of inauthenticity meanwhile comes of giving people essentially additional voices. If I if if I no person should be a crowd.
mm,
I mean, there are plenty of inauthentic accounts or anonymous accounts that are not really harmful. I mean, suppose I set up a fake account for my cat Shadow, and I have this account like different brands of cat food. I mean, this is technically a fake account, but it's not actually that bad. We're doing that many things, like a few like sprinkled here and there as a joke between friends. It's not exactly harmful, etc. The issue comes if it comes when I do things in large numbers with large numbers of accounts, and and so and so ultimately it's the issue of inauthenticity tied to coordination because 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 ultimately every person should have a single voice. No person should be able to appear like a crowd. If there are if a politician makes a post and you see 100 comments on those posts, you should be able to know who those comments are from. Not necessarily the true names of who made those comments, but at the very least, these comments may all be from different accounts, but are they actually from the same person? Is this person using additional voices to create the apparent appearance of consensus? When really all it is one very loud, obnoxious person who feels like repeating themselves.
Right. Right. Thank you so much for that, Sophie. My next question, I know you are quite tired about being asked about the Wire series on Meta, and I mean the latest statement from Wire does seem to show that you were right in that the reports must have been fabricated. My question is not about the story by Wire at all, but about in this sort of age where we are doing investigative stories which are based on tech, or investigative stories about large tech companies. What kind of a collaboration is needed between journalists and tech experts? And what should sort of journalists be wary of, or what should we be aware of when we are working on issues that we may not be like domain experts in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to be clear that I am not an expert on journalism and what journalists should do. I mean, this is my personal opinion. My understanding is that in India, there isn't really a separate tech reporting field the way there is in the United States and Western world. When people discuss tech reporting in India, I'm told that it's more things like product reviews, which is very different from tech reporting in the United States, which looks at the inner workings of those companies and tries to hold them accountable, and often tries to hold them accountable. And so and so one thing I have personally noticed is that frankly, because of the lack of a separate beat, essentially because the lack of specialty reporters in this area, there seems to sometimes be less expertise among Indian reporters in terms of understanding stories, understanding the specific allegations, and differentiating technical terms, and 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 processing documentation, etc. Here is a very basic example. I'm not going to name names, but when I tried to come forward with several dozen Indian news outlets with my documentation back in June, I was I needed to assist half a dozen reporters and outlets on how to open the zip file. I mean, all of them
Right.
framed it as if it were somehow my mistake or problem. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't open this. Your file is broken, and they had to explain to them, no, it's a zip file. You download it on your computer. Your computer will have the software to open it, and and you may be laughing now, but this has real consequences for. I mean, when reporters have trouble doing this sort of thing, their knowledge about internal systems, about processes, about the difference between this and that, etc. It's not guaranteed. Another example, my first interaction actually with the Indian press, it happened it happened when an internal memo I wrote, intended for an internal Facebook audience, was leaked to the wider world in September of 2020. And in that memo, I used a terminology, bad actors, which is the terminology that everyone in the cybersecurity sphere is familiar with. It refers to essentially someone who has bad intentions, who is trying to exploit the system for their personal gain. But the reporter who looked from Times Now, who looked at it, presumably did not know that. They did not ask anyone from the security sphere, I'm guessing, because they saw that word, that phrase, and they made assumptions. And suddenly there were reports that they had caught Bollywood red-handed interfering in Indian elections. I mean, certainly they were not trying to. Certainly, I'm sure they were not trying to mislead. I'm sure they were very busy and wanted to write up a descriptor on the fly. But this is frankly something that is something that I do not think an American outlet would make the same mistake. Not because Americans in general are more knowledgeable, but simply because American outlets have technology reporters who are more familiar with their specific field and the nuances and ins and out, and hence understand these issues better. And so and so any I mean, this is not perfect. I mean, I think that the Wire did have technical experts and reporters, and it was not denied. And I mean, uh, and that may have led into separate issues. If I, from my perspective, in general, with the documentation that shared by the Wire, what immediately gave me pause was that it was too understandable, easy, self-contained, and apparent. It was, I mean, the initial document was 1 or 2 pages, and it was essentially, we did the bad thing. This is how we did the bad thing. This is why we did the bad thing, etc. And if you look at other actual Facebook documentation, such as the ones that I have published and shared, the ones that Francis has published, it is not that simple. It is hidden. It is hidden within layers of context, technical jargon, and nuance. There are no easy screenshots, and you have to actually understand and process. And I think that it's typical. I think that it's frankly typical for the technology world, or perhaps for any complex field. I mean, uh, if nothing else, people try very hard within the system to present their motivations, to prevent their motivations even within the company in ways that sound nice or acceptable. It's in the same way that that politicians may have selfish motives, but when they speak publicly, they are very concerned about the people, not with their selfish motives. And, and so and so if it looks too good to be true, it perhaps is. But a separate aspect is I think the story could come about because there is such great public interest in Facebook and other tech companies, and great public concern. The, and the social media company itself may be very insular, but there have been many people from within those companies who have spoken out, like myself, like Francis, like others, such as, for instance, Alex Stamos, it's Sumit Chakrabarti, etc. And they make the idea that an insider within the company would speak out plausible, but it also, frankly, gives the potential for for a check on potential. Is this actually plausible? Is this valid? And so that is a lot of what ultimately happened with the Wire, because the same essentially Facebook diaspora of expats from Facebook who left and made the story plausible, that diaspora was also the people that were able to discredit it, because in many cases they clearly were not, their loyalties were not only to Facebook. and they could be many of them had been critics of the company, and yet they did not find the documentation presented to be plausible. And so, I mean, I'm not an expert on everything, but if an outlet has documentation that they believe is from within Facebook, I mean, I'm I am certainly not perfect, and I am not an expert, but I would be happy to look at the documentation and tell you my opinion. And is this plausible? Is this too good? Does this look unusual? I mean, so if you have documentation from other tech companies, I would advise you to talk to people from those companies. And if it's more things like emails, and you want to check DKIM or etc., I would ask other people who actually know how to do those things. But ultimately, part of what happened at we don't know what happened at the wire. I mean, it might be. I mean, some people have all sorts of speculations, and, and we don't really know. It might be a situation similar to that of I think her name was Needy at NDTV, who had the fake Harvard job offer, in which someone went to great extents to mislead her. It might be a similar case with the wire today. But I think there are real questions about the emails that were supposedly sent by experts, published by the wire, that those experts said that they did not send. And if it turns out, for instance, that a reporter at the wire was responsible without the rest of the wire's knowledge, that would reveal an issue with knowledge compartmentalization. That if you have one technical person but no others, that technical person has no oversight. But this is speculation. I do not know what happened.
Absolutely. Right. Thanks, Sophie, for that. You've talked a little bit in a couple of pieces, I think, about being a trans woman in tech, and about being worried that initially when you were coming out with the documents that you didn't want to perhaps reveal your trans identity because that you might not be taken seriously, if I'm not wrong. So can you, I mean, across the world right now, we are sort of seeing a surge of transphobia. People who call themselves feminists, a lot of cis women especially, are sort of driving this transphobia across the world. Do you see this in STEM as well? And how has this whole sort of atmosphere affected you personally, if you'd like to talk about that?
Yeah, I wouldn't describe STEM as one monolithic field. I've spent my entire life in STEM. When I was a child, I made up I made my mind up for what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to become a physics professor. And as you can see, that has not quite worked out. But I spent most of my life, up until 7 years ago, in physics academia, first in undergrad, then in grad school. At that, when I was in graduate school, I was not comfortable being out as trans. Part of it was frankly a very different time. This was 2012 through 2015, and when I came out and transitioned, this was in 2010, and the expectation at the time that was frankly that every trans person would do their best to remain stealth, essentially, was what it was called, and pretend to be cis and leave their old life behind and be and do their best to act completely normal and blend in. And I mean, that was the assumption I had when I came out and transitioned, and I didn't even question that assumption for a few years. I don't know what would have happened with if I had been open about it in my department. I was very concerned about it. I was very concerned about it at the time. I mean, that isn't to say that no one in the new university knew. Like I was also involved in queer activism and leadership at the university. I ended up as the president of the queer grad students group, though many people assumed that it was because I was lesbian only. But but any and I have found I did find the tech industry to be potentially more open about these issues when I came when I moved fields in 2015. But I only have a few data points. I mean, I was a graduate student at one university. I have worked at two tech companies. This is not a very good sample, quite frankly, and I cannot speak for others for people in general. And as for myself, I mean, when I came forward as a whistleblower, I mean, I didn't want I would I tried very hard to avoid distractions to my messages and things that would take me less and things that would cause people to take me much less seriously. Not just because my work was not partly because my work was not just in the United States. My work was in countries like Honduras, like Azerbaijan, like India, where it is frankly more socially conservative. In Azerbaijan, for instance, I caught the government red-handed running an IT cell of tens of thousands of fake assets being used on massive scales to harass the opposition. Who was that political opposition in Azerbaijan? It includes people like the Honorable Rafik Manafli, I believe, who was caught on a recording opining that it was a tragedy that Hitler failed to exterminate all the gays. And and frankly, if I was going to be taken seriously in those countries, I assumed from the start that I should not be open about some things. And part of it also was, frankly, I did not want to stereotype the community. I did not want it to be associated that trans people were troublemakers, internal dissidents, etc. Because in the same way that, for instance, Jewish people were accused of being communists 100 years ago. What really happens, of course, is that it's that people who are treated who may be treated poorly by a system look for ways to change that system. But I'm also not a very outspoken person myself. I mean, there are plenty of trans people who are loud and open about it. I've never dyed my hair or anything stereotypical like that, and which is perfectly fine. I mean, I for myself, I think so much of my life has been abnormal, for lack of a better word, that I look for normality in the rest of it. I stay home with my girlfriend and pet my cats, and I'm close to a housewife, and that's perfect. And that sounds very nice to me. I, I don't really want to. Don't really want to be loud on the streets or etc. And that's my personal preference. With regards to people people who have been critical of trans or queer people in general, I'm perfectly aware that much of the world would see me would does see me as a deranged lunatic who does not who does should not have the right to make decisions about my own life or body, let alone the broader world. I still did my best to fight for them because democracy uh, and rule of law should never be conditional.
Thank you so much, Sophie, for that. I think that was really my last question, but I just want to ask you one last thing in terms of there are a lot of young trans people in India. Jobs are a huge problem here for queer and trans people, especially for trans persons. And I know that there are a lot of queer people who are interested in science, who are interested in tech, who are interested in STEM fields. Is you did sort of say that in your experience, the tech field has been a little bit more open, and we are seeing that there are a lot of diversity and inclusion sort of attempts in tech companies. Do you think there are any ways in which trans and queer persons can sort of what kind of steps can they take to enter the industry? Is it a good idea to sort of be out from the beginning, or sort of get in the door and then slowly see how safe a space is, and then like sort of decide for themselves if they want to come out or not? I mean, if you want to answer this, there is no sort of compulsion.
So I want to say that this situation is different for everyone, and I don't want people to universalize from my experiences, which of course was in the United States, and as everyone knows, the United States is not India. Although all the Indian restaurants and people near my home may say otherwise. But anyways, I have done both varieties myself. When I applied to graduate school and went to graduate school, I was not open about being trans. I mean, I could not hide the fact that I had legally changed my name, of course, and published papers under my old name. But I didn't explain that, and they had a ready excuse prepared if anyone asked. The ready excuse was that, I mean, many Chinese names do not translate nicely to English names, and etc. And my old name was embarrassing to myself, and they found the need to change it, which was perfectly true. But I never needed to actually use this excuse, but I prepared one nonetheless. And I was not really open in my time at graduate school. It led to some funny moments sometimes. My housemate decided to ask me for advice on what tampons to use at one point, and I made up an excuse for, well, I do not, well, I can't help much because I don't need them, which is perfectly true, but she may have come to interesting conclusions from that. When I decided to leave graduate school and enter industry, I was applying for jobs mostly in the San Francisco Bay Area, which has a reputation of being very good in terms of tolerance, though it's certainly not perfect. And at that point, I made the decision that I was going to be open about being trans, because if it gave me difficulty in employment, I would not want to work at that place anyways. But that was a decision I could afford to make. I had savings. I had an advanced degree from Princeton, which has a strong reputation, and it was still very difficult for me to find a job. But I was fine making that decision, and that is not a decision, and that is not a case that everyone is comfortable making. And if you do feel that it is important to first get your foot in the door, that is understandable, especially in a country that is, for lack of a better word, more socially conservative and less tolerant or acceptable for those things. Everyone's personal situation is different, and I don't want to presume to tell them what to do.
Right. Thank you so much, Sophie, for this. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Yes. Bye.